Welcome everybody. We just got back from Spot and we were like, we're still flying. So I think this event is probably, tonight's event is probably going to just take us to a whole nother level. Some of you have read my own bio and my own experience, and I was involved with a yeshiva, a little yeshiva in the old city for about 20 years called Esha Torah, and that's actually where I met Rabbi Moshe Zeldman. I think he was already an old timer by the time I got there. So
You're older than me.
you were there. I was.
I think so.
Okay. You're just more mature than I am. Anyway, for 10 of those years, I organized a group called Jerusalem Fellowships, which was college-age kids who really have a lot of questions with a lot of background and knowledge of science and math. And I certainly didn't know how to answer their questions, but I organized, I'm going to guess, hundreds of times Moshe giving over this series. I really felt it was appropriate, especially now, after what we just had with Gab several times, and just in order of, there's some chachma, believe me. Anyway, so let me just get on with the show and introduce Moshe. Rabbi Moshe Zeldman is the Director of Education at Jerusalem U and an international lecturer on a wide variety of Jewish topics, traveling to speak and consult internationally. He did his undergraduate work in artificial intelligence and philosophy at the University of Toronto, and he received his rabbinic ordination from Esha Torah in Jerusalem. And without any further ado, Rabbi Moshe.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Nice to be here. Nice to meet you all. I think my first time ever around here. I don't travel to this part of the city so much. I'm up in Neve Yaakov, and between Neve Yaakov and the old city, I pretty much do everything I need to do. This is called Baka, this neighborhood official? Yeah. Nice, okay. Nice to be here. Nice to meet you all. So tonight's presentation is a little bit unique. It's not really a Torah lecture per se. It's really a scientific discovery based on things that we found in Torah. Just by show of hands, how many of you have heard of the idea of hidden codes in the Torah? No. Well, kind of heard about it? How many of you have heard of the controversy, the scientific controversy about it? Okay, and last question, how many of you are at least a little skeptical about the idea of whether there's such a thing actually exists? When I first heard about it, okay, I was doing my degree in AI in Toronto, University of Toronto. I wasn't religious at all. And I saw on campus they were advertising some guy coming to give a class about hidden encoded patterns in the Bible. So I thought, okay, it's going to be some rabbi playing around with letters and numbers and gematrias and who knows what, and it's kind of fun, but not that good, not that relevant. Anyway, I went to hear this lecture. The lecturer turned out to be a senior mathematician from the Pentagon, from Baltimore. Pentagon, and he had worked as a cryptologist for many years, cracking codes for the U.S. government. That was his credentials. So I thought, okay, this isn't rabbit playing around. It might be interesting. Give a whole class about hidden codes in the Torah, mathematical sequences. He explained it all. Because I was doing a degree in the sciences, I had a lot of very skeptical questions. How did you test it? How did you measure it? What was your hypothesis? How do you analyze the results? What are the probabilities? He answered all my questions. So I walked away from that class saying, okay, either it's legitimate, or this guy is a really good faker. The only way I'll know for sure is I'm going to go home and try doing the same thing myself. Now, I have a computer background. It wasn't hard to find copies of Torah, put them on, do computer programming to try and find sequences, and I found that from a lot of the examples I remembered that he gave on campus, I was able to see the same things myself. He wasn't faking it. These things are really there. I found it. I was so intrigued by it. I contacted the original researchers here in Jerusalem at Hebrew University. I got the material, I did some more research, I did my own studies, I did my own experiments, came to the conclusion, this is for real. This is not a game, this is a real thing. And it's so shocking that it's there, and that it's there in a way that you can prove scientifically. I said, this is it. Like, this is groundbreaking. The world has to hear about this, people have to know about this. So for the last many years, I've been researching and studying and lecturing and publishing on the topic of codes. What I want to show you tonight is, we're going to start, let's say, from the more skeptical perspective. We're going to look at some simple examples of codes, and let's see as we go through it. My main goal is to do two things. I want to show you lots of interesting examples of things we found, but more than that, I want to show you why we believe it's credible and it's scientifically reliable, and why this should be taken seriously by the world of science. So here we go. We're going to start with a basic question. The question is, why would anybody even make the assumption that you would find hidden secret codes in the Torah? I mean, who opens up a book in any language and starts looking for secret messages? When's the last time you opened a book and started looking for secret messages? Why would you assume the Torah would have secret messages? Any idea?
If the Beatles way out and had it.
The White House has the culture came. So why not?
Well, it's a special book, and every letter counts here.
Good, right?
It's not an ordinary book.
Good, so we know this isn't just a book by an author, this is claimed to be a book from God. Now, some people believe that, some people don't, but the claim is God wrote the book. Now, if God wrote a book, it's going to be deep, it's going to be sophisticated, it's going to have many layers of messages, it's not going to be simple stories. That's why we look for codes. Now, the truth is, in Kabbalah, there's a deeper reason. The Zohar says, Histakel ba'oraita ubari alma. God looked into the Torah and created the world. There's an idea in Kabbalah that God actually created the Torah before he made the world. The Torah is like the blueprint, like an architect, right? Start with the blueprint. From the blueprint, you collect the materials, and then you make the building. The Zohar is saying that God made the Torah, looked into this blueprint called Torah, and then made the world. Now, if the Torah is just a blueprint for the world, so what does it mean? Everything that you find in the world, you should find in the Torah, right? If I look at the blueprint for this building, the blueprint will say how high the ceilings are, where the windows are, where the doors are, where the wiring goes. There should be a one-to-one parallel between what you see in the building and what you find in the blueprint. Similarly here, I should look in the world and assume that whatever I see in the world, I'll find in the blueprint called Torah. Taking it a step further, the Vilna Gaon, 1700s, he says the rule is that all that was, is, and will be until the end of time is included in the Torah, from Breshit to Le'enei Kol Yisrael, the end of Devarim. And not merely in a general sense, but including the details of every species and of each person individually, and the most minute details of everything that happened to him from the day of his birth until his death. That's the kind of blueprint we're talking about, right? Every wire, every fiber, every single detail of the reality should be found in the blueprint. We're only going to say everything in the world you will find in Torah. Now, the big difficulty is, okay, that sounds cool, that's interesting. You're telling me that when I'm holding a chumash, I'm literally holding everything about my life and about the future and about the past and everything that's going to happen. Cool. But how do you find it? Like, it's a book. How do you decode the message? How do you find all this secret information? So again, Kabbalah gives us a hint. The Moshe Cordovero, 1500s, famous Kabbalist in Tzfat in the 1500s, Moshe Cordovero says, the secrets of our Holy Torah are revealed through knowledge of combinations, numerology, we call gematria, switching letters, first and last letters, shapes of letters, first and last verses, skipping letters, and letter combinations. These are all the different ways that the author encoded the information in the book. In other words, just like any of these ideas, if I take theoretically the first and last letter of every pasuk in Torah and I put them all together, it's supposed to spell out some sort of a message. If I take every third letter and I put them together, or every 50th letter, put them together, it's supposed to spell some sort of a message. What we're going to look at tonight is this idea called skipping letters, dilugotiyot. What happens to the text when you read every 10 letters, every 500 letters, every 2,000 letters going backwards? What happens when you skip letters? We find examples of codes. That's what we're going to look at. These matters are powerful, hidden, and enormous secrets. Because of their great hiddenness, we don't have the ability to fully comprehend them. Further, to see different angles through these methods is infinite and without limit. And this, the Torah says, its measure is longer than the world, right? Anyway, I give a class on this often to secular Jewish audiences. I travel around a lot. I'm talking to a completely secular crowd of people who don't believe in the divinity of Torah at all. And I'm telling them, like, you hold the 5 books of Moses, has the secrets to the whole universe. Everything that's ever going to happen in the whole world is secretly coded in there. You can find it by skipping through letters. The idea sounds nuts. It just sounds crazy. But let's test it out. Let's see if we can find examples of this idea, and let's see if it really holds weight. These are all statements taken back, going back to the 1500s and 1700s. In the 1950s, there was a rabbi in Czechoslovakia right after the war named Rav Chaim Dov Weissmantel. He was involved with saving Jews in the Holocaust, involved with bribing the Nazis. He's got a fascinating history. But he read these statements and he said, listen, it's all encoded in there, let's see if we can find it. He himself in the 1950s started looking for examples of codes. Here's what he did. He says, let's open up to the Torah, beginning of the Torah. This is the beginning. He says, let's see if we can find a code of the word Torah encoded in the Torah. Okay, so we're going to skip through letters. Let's start at the first taf of Bereshit over there. What happens if you count forward a certain number of letters? Do we find a code of the word Torah? He started counting, he started analyzing. He finds a code that says that from that first taf, 50 letters exactly after the taf you have a vav, another 50 you have a resh, another 50 you have a hey. We have an equal skipping code of the word Torah in the beginning of the Torah. Now again, I want you to try and be a little skeptical here. Would you say that this is a proof that there's secret hidden messages in the Torah? No. Anybody think it's a proof? None of us are that impressed, right? Why not? What's your explanation for how this code got here mysteriously?
50 is not that high a number.
Huh?
50 is not that high a number. If somebody's going to write it out, they get the work
If it was every 500th letter, would it be more impressive?
It's not really a big enough sample to make it valid.
Okay, good. What's your background, by the way?
It's psychology.
Psychology, okay. But you know experiments, you have to test many subjects, right? Sample of error. You would look at this and say, you know what? It could have just been a coincidence. If I look at today's Jerusalem Post, and I look for the first time it says the letter P, and I count every 50th letter, and it spells P-O-S-T, am I going to assume that the editor is secretly encoding messages in the Post? No.
You'd say that's cool.
Huh?
You would say that's cool.
It's cool, it's interesting. Probably just a cute coincidence, right? Doesn't really mean anything. It happened to be that he went on and said, you know what? Let's look and say for Shmot. Elish Shmot Ben Israel. Start from the top for Shmot. You count every 50th letter. It spells Torah again. Interesting. The same thing happens in the second book. The third book it didn't happen. In Sefer Vayikra. In Bamidbar it happened again. In Devarim it happened again. It happened in 4 or 5 books. In Sefer Vayikra he found the word Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, also every 7 letters at the beginning of the book. Okay, he's finding these weird patterns. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, kind of hard to know. But I'll tell you this, even if I showed you a lot of examples of codes like this, so many that you'd say there's just no way it happened by coincidence. What's another non-supernatural, what's another natural explanation for how all the codes got here? Could have been a coincidence, could have been God, or it could have been
Put there by the writers.
the writers. Maybe the Jews in the desert thousands of years ago, right? You're traveling through the desert for 40 years. You have a lot of free time on your hands. You're writing down the story. You can start moving around the letters and words and encoding all kinds of sayings and phrases. It's not that difficult. Not so hard to do. So even if I showed you a lot of examples, it's not that impressive because a human being could have done it. Right? So what we want to see to be a little bit more accurate is we find examples of codes that we would have to say we know no human being could have encoded. What's an example of a code we could look at that we know did not come from a human? Any
Computer code?
DNA? Give me some other examples. What kind of a code? What kind of wording when we look for it and say there's no way human beings could have put those words there?
Well, here's something I would guess, like how, I mean, Fibonacci was how many years after it was given? Hundreds and hundreds.
Many.
I would take a quick look at Fibonacci and see what happens there.
Fibonacci's a good. What's another example? You don't have to go as complicated as Fibonacci. What about the word Napoleon? Or the word Obama? Or the word Trump? Right? If I find any kind of codes of things that they couldn't have known back then, and I find codes like that, you'd say, listen, okay, there's no way human beings thousands of years ago knew about Napoleon or Queen Elizabeth or the Titanic, you know, whatever it is. Any relatively modern day finding names, dates, places that weren't known back then, you have to say, no human being could have put it there. So let's have a look. Rabbi Weissmantel, same thing. He says, okay, we're going to find a code now of words related to the Rambam. Right? Torah we have goes back to 3,300 years ago. The Rambam lived in the 1200s, less than 1,000 years ago. It's relatively modern in Jewish history. Nobody in the desert thousands of years ago knew about the Rambam. He wasn't around yet. Rabbi Weissmandel says, let's see if we can find codes related to the Rambam, or Moshe ben Maimon, right? Famous rabbi. So here we find the story of Parshas Bo. The Jewish people are in Mitzrayim. They're trying to get out. Moshe goes to Paro to get the Jews out. So Hashem says, Moshe, go and ask. Paro's going to say no. He's not going to let you out. We're going to do all the miracles. We'll do all the plagues. So the pasuk says, "Vayomer Hashem el Moshe." Right at the top. Lo yishma aleichem Paro. He says, Pharaoh. He says, Moshe, Pharaoh's not going to listen to you. Leman rivot moftai be'eretz Mitzrayim. Hashem says, I'm going to do all my marvels, all my miracles in the land of Egypt. What Weissmandel says, if you look carefully there, rivot moftai be'eretz Mitzrayim are the 4 initial letters that spell the word Rambam. 4 words in a row, somewhere in Torah, it spells the word Rambam, right? A much later day rabbi than the times of Torah, going back to the desert. Are we surprised that somewhere in the Torah there's 4 words that spell the word Rambam? Why not? Because there's lots of words in Torah. There's about 80,000 words in the whole Torah. What's the big deal that somewhere there's 4 words spelled Rambam, right? It's not that big of a deal. What's interesting is, this was discovered in the 1950s. In the 80s, some scientists got together, they analyzed it. They said, let's look at all the initial letters of all the words in the entire Torah, all 80,000 words. It's interesting that this is the only place it happens. The only place in the entire Torah where we have 4 words in a row that's called the word Rambam happens to be over here. Okay, so it's a unique, it's not miraculous, but it's a unique occurrence.
Just want to, so the person who found this from down the Asia is the Rabbi
Was
The first figure that found from Baum is this initial letter from Baum. Almost the same as Haggadah Vilna.
Right. But what I'm not sure what Rabbi Weissmandel found on this same passage. You're right. Let's ask this. Is there anything, right, this is the only where it says the word Rambam as a code. Is there anything unique about the fact that it happens to land right over here in this passage of Torah? Is there any connection between the Rambam and the story that's going on? Lived in Egypt, right? With the so-called Zeldman of Egypt. Any other connections you can think of? Who's God talking to? Who's talking to Moshe? Of course, the Rambam's first name. Moshe ben Maimon, right? The one pasuk in the whole Torah that has a code of his name is about a guy named Moshe and about a place called Mitzrayim. Rabbi Weissman will notice that if you keep reading the story down over here, right? You have a story here, God tells Moshe, get the Jews out, etc. Down over here, the story says, the Jews were told to bring a Korban Pesach, right? Before they came out of Egypt, bring a Paschal lamb as an offering, Korban Pesach. So the Torah says, "V'hayat lachem lemishmeret." Hold on to this lamb. Ad 14 yom lechodesh hazeh. Hold on to the lamb until the 14th day of the month. This is right before you see Mitzrayim, Pesach. What month on the calendar are we talking about? What month on the Hebrew calendar? Month of Nisan, right? Hold on to the animal until the 14th day of Nisan. We check the history books. The Rambam's birthday was the 14th of Nisan. The one page in the whole Torah that has his name encoded talks about Moshe, talks about Egypt. A few verses later talks about the 14th of Nisan. Bingo, exactly the date of the Rambam's birthday. Good. Rabbi Weissmandel looked at this. He was very impressed with it. He published it. His students, we're talking 1950s now, his students in the 1970s looked at this. They were blown away. This is amazing. The Rambam and his day and his name and the birthday. These students went to Hebrew University, Department of Mathematics, and said, listen, we've got all these codes here, this name, this rabbi, he lived, all the information. This is, like proof that only God could have written the Torah. The mathematicians in Hebrew said, no. There's hundreds of rabbis you could have looked for. There's lots of dates in the Torah. There's lots of names of people and places. You found one example. It's not a big enough sample. So here's what the scientists said. They said, if you can find encoded in the same area the name of the Rambam's most famous book, if it's encoded in the same place, that would already be interesting. See if you can find the word Mishnah Torah. Right? Mishnah Torah is Rambam's encyclopedia, basically, where he catalogs, he explains all of the 613 mitzvahs. Can I find the phrase Mishnah Torah encoded in the same place? So these students go back, they sit there and they have a look at it. Here's what they find. That if you start at the mem of the word Moshe, which is his first name, 50 letters and then 50 letters and 50 letters. spells the word Mishnah, right in the same spot. They kept counting and looking down over here. Eventually they find a code down over here, tough, 50 letters, 50 letters, 50 letters, that spells Torah. The word Mishnah and the word Torah, the Rambam's most famous book, lands on the same pages. His name, and his birthday, and his country, and everything else. All there in the same spot. Now, you're very excited about it. They go back to Hebrew. Look what we found. Exactly what you asked for. We found the Rambam's most famous book. It's on the same page. So the scientists looked at it. They said, okay, interesting. But there's one thing that bothered them. It's kind of interesting how it all lands, but there's something a little bit odd about how the codes all land on the page. What seems a little bit strange about the coding on the page? Word Mishnah Torah, anything seem a little unusual? But they were bothered by it. They said, why is there this big gap between Mishnah and Torah? I mean, if the word is Mishnah Torah, that's the name of the book, put Mishnah and then Torah every 50 letters. Why is there a huge space in between the two words? So on the spot, these scientists had to look at it. They started counting the letters. They found the space between Mishnah and Torah comes out to be exactly 613 letters. The space from Mishnah to Torah is 613. The whole subject of the book is the 613 commandments. It's on the same page. As his name, as his birthday, as his country, as his first name, all together. So again, you could look at it and say, wow, that's just a huge coincidence. Or you could say, that's clearly a designed pattern. But nobody's going to say that a human being did this. Nobody's going to tell you that the Jews in the desert thousands of years ago decided to encode the name of a rabbi who's going to live 2,000 years hence, and his birthday, his name, and his book, and everything. That's impossible. So it's either just a grand coincidence, or it's God. It's either a divine pattern, or it's just a pretty bit of a crazy coincidence. Does that make sense so far? Any questions on anything we said so far? We're good? Sure? Okay. Because what we're doing now is we're going to say, okay, right, we're going to really analyze this. How do you measure? Is it coincidental? Is it not? How improbable does it have to be? Does it seem unusual? Does it seem very unusual? Does it seem very, very unusual? How do you know? So what you really need to do is you need to enter into the world of statistics. You need a scientist who can look at something and say, what are the odds that this kind of thing could have happened by chance? Is it a 1 in 5 chance? Is it a 1 in 50 chance? Is it a 1 in 5,000 chance? How do you analyze it? So yeah.
Did they ever try to do the same thing with another book, which is not a...
Yes, we're going to show a few examples of that in a few minutes. They decided, you know what, at Hebrew U, if we can find some mathematicians that are interested in studying this and really analyzing it scientifically, then we'll know if we have something special. So they meet a fellow at Hebrew U by the name of Eliyahu Rips. Eliyahu Rips is a world-famous mathematician. He was a little bit skeptical about this. He started looking into it. We're going to look at now. I want to show you a short video, a couple of minutes, about him. Because Professor Rips is one of the main guys now involved with us together doing the codes research. Okay? So we'll get the sound will work here. Let's try this out.
One well-known form of code found in the Bible is called a skip code.
Skip codes involve a different way to read a text than we normally do. Usually we read one letter at a time, the first letter, the second letter, and the third letter, and so forth. But with a skip code, we might start with the third letter, and then skip ahead 10 to the 13th letter, and then to the 23rd letter, and so forth. And maybe that would spell out a new word, jumping 10 letters at a time. Here's an example. There's a sentence here that says, my way of showing a skip code is encrypted in the very words I put down here. Let's take the first letter and jump every 14 and make that red. It's very hard to read as it's written here. We see the letter M-A-R-Y-H-A-D. It's not so legible. So to make it look nicer and understand it better, what we usually do is we break the line before each red letter. So now, we have each line starting with a red letter, and now the red letters are in a column and it's very easy to read. Mary had a little lamb.
One of these simple codes, particularly called Rips's imagination. It appears at the beginning of the Torah, the Jewish Bible, which is made up of the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
When we start with the first T in the book of Genesis. In fact, it covers the first verse. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Starting with the first T and taking every 50 letters, the word Torah appears.
Exactly the same pattern appeared in the second book of the Torah, Exodus. Again, starting with the first T and skipping 49 letters. The word Torah appears.
It was enough to me to be most intrigued, to think something very interesting might go on.
Rex began to employ a computer program that could search for skip codes like this at enormous speed. He could have had no idea where it would lead.
So Professor Rips is a part of a team. There's about 8 of us all together around the world, mostly in Israel, but in the States as well, that have been working for years on these kinds of codes. Professor Rips is sort of the head of the team. He's the mathematician behind it. So I want to show you just the idea of looking for words by computer. And for every time we find a word, the computer is going to set up the screen based on the word that we found. Just like we said before, Mary had a little lamb. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take the book of Bereshit. It's 78,064 letters long. It's a decent sized book, right? Take Sefer Bereshit, the book of Genesis. Let's tell the computer to look for a specific word skipping letters in the book. In this example, we're going to show you, we're going to tell the computer to look for the word Hanukkah. Does the word Hanukkah appear encoded anywhere in Bereshit? So the computer's looking every 2 letters through the whole book to see if it says Hanukkah. It doesn't. It looks every 3 letters, backwards and forwards. It doesn't find it. It looks every 4 letters, every 5 letters, every 6, every 7. He's counting, counting, counting. Finally, after a few minutes, the computer said it found a code that skips the word Hanukkah. And it turns out to be every 262 letters on each line. So all I did over here is I made each line 262 letters across so that we can see, I'm going to zoom in a second, you can see the code of the word Hanukkah going up and down. Clear? Again, the shortest skipping code of the word Hanukkah in the book of Genesis is every 262. There's a chet, 262 letters later, there's a nun, and then a vav, and then a chaf, and then a hey. We put that number of letters per line so we can see Hanukkah going straight up and down, just like Mary had a little lamb. So here we are. If I zoom in on this screen, here's what it looks like. And we found a code of the word Hanukkah. It should be over here. There it is. Actually, the word ha-Hanukkah. Lechanech means to dedicate. Ha-Hanukkah means the dedication. When the temple was rededicated, taken away from the Greeks. We have the code of the word Hanukkah, every 262 going backwards. Clear so far? Now, like I said, the fact that we found a word encoded in a book, in and of itself, is not a big deal. You look hard enough, you can find any word you want in any book you want to look in. Where it gets interesting is this. We say, okay, now that that's the one spot that said Hanukkah in the whole book of Genesis, let's tell the computer to look for another word that's related to Hanukkah. Where does the word Hashmona'i? It has no names. Where does the word Hashmona'i appear encoded in Bereshit? So the computer goes through the whole book of Bereshit, every 2 letters, doesn't find it. Looks every 3 letters, backwards and forwards, it doesn't find it. Every 4, every 5, every 6, every 7, counts and counts and counts and counts. After a few minutes, the computer said it found a code somewhere in Bereshit that said Hashmona'i. It's every 525 letters apart. Okay, here's the magical question. Where in the book of Bereshit does it say Hashmona'i? Skipping equal letters. Huh? This is not. Actually, it's going to be, these examples are Parshas Vayishlach. I'll explain why in a minute. It turns out that the word Hashmona'i, skipping equal letters every 525, happens to land in the same spot that said the word Hanukkah. Right? You have to remember, there's pages and pages and pages. There's 78,000 letters for the computer to look through. The fact that it found the code of Hanukkah and the code of Hashmona'i in the same spot, statistically, scientifically, it's very unusual. Right? It's like, imagine you're We're on the top of the Empire State Building, and you throw a paper airplane out the window, flies around downtown Manhattan for a few minutes, it lands on, 42nd and Broadway, okay, on top of a shoe store. You take a second airplane, you throw it out, it spins around the air for 10 minutes, it lands on top of the same shoe store at 42nd and Broadway. I mean, that airplane could have landed, there's blocks and blocks here, it's landing in the exact same spot. It's very unusual. So if you threw out 2 paper airplanes, they spun all over the place, they landed in the same spot, what would you want to do next to try out to test your experiment? Try another one. Let's take another word related to Hanukkah, tell the computer to look through the whole book of Breshit and see if it appears anywhere. Computer, look for the word Maccabee. The Maccabees. Where does the word Maccabee appear encoded in Breshit, skipping an equal number of letters? Looks through the whole book, it says it found it right away. There's a spot in Breshit where it says Maccabee every 2 letters. Where is it? It happens to land right over there, in the green. The word Maccabee. We just threw a third airplane from the Empire State Building. It landed on top of the first airplane in the same spot. It's a little weird that that would happen. It could have landed blocks away. This could have landed tens of thousands of letters away. They're all landing together. Okay, what else do we find? We find the word Yehuda, head of the Maccabees. That's actually in the text itself, it says the word Yehuda. We find the word Yavan, right? We fought off the Greeks, that was the empire. Yavan is every 1 letter backwards, same area. We find the word Het Yamim, 8 days, right? The miracle of the oil lasted for 8 days. We take 6 words, we plug them in, they all appear encoded. We threw 6 airplanes, they're all landing in the same rooftop. That's the phenomenon that we're looking for in codes. Take any subject, put together the words, look by computer, and see if they land in the same spot. We're going to see many, many, many times, most times, all the words keep landing together. Just to zoom back to the original text, right? Here's all 6 words landing in a spot that's pages and pages and pages of text, yet they all happen to land exactly together. Yeah?
So playing the skeptic, what about the other books?
What about
The other books.
the other books?
The other words, checking through those to see if they land in similar spots in the other books.
The other books of Chumash. Look at Shemot and Vayikra. So the truth is, this experiment was done at a time when computers were not very fast. There was only enough computing power that it could check 1 book at a time. So we started with Breshit. When computers got more advanced, we're going to see, we're going to do scanning, looking through all 5 books together as 1 string. We're going to find codes there also. Okay, but for now, we found this in Breshit, that's the book that we looked at. But it's a good question. So it's like 6 airplanes, you throw them up, they spin around, they all land in the same spot.
So there's words chosen first, and then you wouldn't.
Very good, yes. Right. The one area where theoretically we could have cheated still is exactly that. In other words, we're claiming, you have to take my word for it, that these are the 6 words we look for, these are the 6 words we found. So what happened was when they found these, Professor Rips goes back to Hebrew U. He shows his friends in Hebrew U, who were pretty skeptical. They said, maybe you didn't look for these 6 words. Maybe you looked for 100 words related to Hanukkah. And these are the 6 that you got lucky on. Maybe you threw 100 airplanes out, and these are the 6 that landed together. How do we know how many other words you looked for that didn't land in that spot? So Professor Ripp says, you know what? You give me a list. You tell me what words to look for. They said, okay, what about the word oil, and the word miracle, and the word war, and the word temple, and the word menorah, and the word Hanukkah, and this word, they gave him a whole bunch of words. They gave him a list of 16 words. They gave him a list of 16 words. He plugged in the 16 words they gave him to see if they appeared. 14 out of the 16 landed here also. 2 words failed. You know what 2 words failed? The word latka and the word dreidel. Both Yiddish. The 14 Hebrew words they looked for all landed up. Again, miracle, oil, temple, Zion, menorah, all the words you think related to Hanukkah, all of them. Huh?
What about City One? Dreidel did.
So City One did work. Dreidel did not, but City One did. Let's look at a more modern example. Let's try something more contemporary. Computer, look for words related to diabetes. Anybody know how you say diabetes in Hebrew?
Sakeret.
Sakeret, very good. We find a code of the word sakeret that happens to land every 6 letters backwards. Somewhere in Breshit it says sakeret going every 6 letters backwards. Again, it's not a big deal. It's 1 word, it's a huge book, anything can happen. But do we find words related to diabetes in the same area? How do you say a pancreas in Hebrew?
A what?
A pancreas. Pancreas?
I can remember.
It's called a love. That's the
Love, right.
right? Love. Computer, where does it say the word pancreas?
Insulin.
The word love lands pretty close to the word.
Love is a new Hebrew word. It's not.
Well, that's the Hebrew word.
It's a modern Hebrew.
No, the really modern Hebrew, they call it pancreas. But that's the Hebrew word. If there's any Hebrew word for pancreas, that's it. There's no other ancient
What about
word.
insulin?
So hold on a second. We find diabetes, we find pancreas, they're pretty close on the same screen. And then we find encoded, very close to both of them, insulin. Exactly as you said. The word insulin is encoded, skipping an equal number of letters right beside diabetes, going right into pancreas. You should know I gave a class on this topic at Tel Aviv U to the math department a few years ago. So one of the guys in the class was just like really like anti, like skeptical. He says, it really says insulin there? I say, yeah, you can count the letters. It's skipping a huge number of letters. It's equal letters between pancreas, He says, there's no way. I said, count it for yourself. You'll see I didn't make up the screen. It's true. He says, I can explain it. I said, okay, how do you explain it? He says, well, insulin was discovered in the 1960s, right? I said, yeah. He says, so after insulin was discovered, maybe the rabbis just went into the Torah and just changed around all the letters to make insulin appear coded beside. I said, that's a great theory. Can you imagine rabbis breaking into synagogues late at night all over the world and scratching out some little letters and making the word insulin every 3,000 letters and nobody's going to find out? Great theory. But if not that, anything else to explain it? Who could have known about insulin even 100 years ago? Never mind 1,000 years ago. Okay. So we found many examples of codes. We were very excited. This was very good for us. We said, you know what? Let's get it published. I mean, if this is real science and it can be proven, let's get it published in a real journal of science. Let's go to a journal of statistics. We'll go to the top journal we can find. We'll show it to them. We'll get them publishing it. We took it to them. They had a look at it, and they said what you said. They said, listen, very nice. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. Because maybe you looked for 100 other diseases. Maybe you looked for codes about AIDS or heart disease or cancer or who knows what, and you didn't find anything. Maybe you're only showing us the codes that you got lucky on once in a while because it worked. They said the only way we would publish it is if you do a completely new experiment. Something that's never been tried, and we're going to see it and see if it actually works. So we said, great, let's do it. We came up with an experiment that said, let's look for the names of famous rabbis. 34 famous rabbis that have lived throughout Jewish history. We're going to see if we can find their names encoded, and we're going to make a prediction that for every time you find the name of a rabbi, you're going to find his yortzeit, his date of death, encoded in the same place as his name. This random was there, we'll find the date over here. Find another here, we're going to find the date over there. We're going to try it 34 times with a list of 34 rabbis. So these scientists said, if you can do that and it works, for sure we'll publish it. This is crazy. We compiled the list, we get the spelling. It was a very complicated experiment. How you spell the word, Gaonani Vilna, is Vilna with one vav or with two vavs? Is it with a yud or without a yud? Is a hey at the end? Is an aleph at the end? It's very complicated to spell words from different languages. We went to somebody in Bar Ilan, they helped us with the spellings, to figure out. It was very complicated, but we did it. We looked up all the dates, we put them all into the computer, and the experiment, it was unbelievably successful. In almost every case, there was a couple of failures, I'll talk about in a minute, but in almost every case, the name and date of the rabbi appeared encoded exactly in the same spot. Just give you one example, we have a rabbi named the Maharshal, or Shlomo Luria. His name appears as a code. Over here, Maharshal, every 229. He passed away on Yud Bet Kislev. In the entire book, where does Yud Bet Kislev? Bingo, Yud Bet Kislev appears right beside his name. We just find his first name also, Shlomo. We find the year that he died also. But the real experiment was just this, the name and the date. We measured the space. We make a calculation, right? He's about 7.5 letters away from each other. That's the space. What are the odds that a random name and a random date in a book that's that big would be that close, time after time after time? Sometimes they were even closer. Sometimes they were a little bit further. On the whole, they were very close. Like I say, with two failures. There's 2 times the name and the date weren't anywhere near each other, and we didn't know why. But 32 out of 34, statistically, that's a very successful experiment. We go back to the journal, we showed them what we did, we showed them it worked. They were blown away by it. They said, fine, we'll publish it. Now, we spent months and months working on this. They're going to publish an article in one of the top journals of science in the world saying that there's hidden codes in the Torah that no human being could have put there. That's unbelievable. In a scientific journal, that would be fantastic.
What journal? Do you know that?
Huh?
What journal? Do you know what journal?
It's called Statistical Science.
Oh,
That's the journal. Comes out of LA. It's the #1 journal of statistics in the world. We were very excited. We gave it to them. They said, fine, we're going to publish it. 2 months later, they sent us a letter and they said, we changed our minds. We're not going to publish it. I said, what do you mean? we spent 6 months working on this. They said, we can't publish it. Why not? They say because the editors of the journal feel that it's too controversial. It's too controversial to publish an article saying God wrote the Torah. We have scientific evidence. There's nothing wrong with the science. It's a little weird for a journal to write an article saying God wrote the Torah when it's a science journal. We don't want to take chances. Maybe there's a mistake we didn't catch. We don't want to publish it. So we contacted them. We had a whole negotiation. They said this. They said, listen, if you can get the man who's known to be the world's #1 statistician, if you can get him to look at this and sign his name onto it, we'll go ahead and publish it. We said, great. Who is this person? Where do we find him? They say his name is Professor Percy Diaconis, professor at Stanford University, known by most as the #1 statistician in the world. If you can get Professor Diaconis to sign his name onto it, no problem, we're going to publish it. Good. We go to meet Professor Diaconis, who's not Jewish, who's not religious, who has no connection to anything religious. Before we met him, I did a little research to find out a little bit more. We're going to meet this guy. I want to know who he is. I discovered that he's one of the founding members of an American organization I had never heard of, an organization called the American Skeptics Association. It's a whole organization, just people who like to be skeptical about things, UFOs and ESP, and all these they're just skeptical. Prove it to me, there's no science behind it, we can disprove it. So we meet Professor Diaconis, we showed him what we did, he had to look at it, he said, this is crazy, there's no way. We said, listen, look for yourself, nobody's found any mistakes in it, we're not playing games here. He says, listen, you want to get it published, there's one thing I'm going to ask you to do. Here's what you said before, really. Do what's called a control experiment. In other words, if the computer has some way of moving things around and making words land near each other, it should be able to do the same thing in any other Hebrew book. Tell the computer to look through another random Hebrew book for the same information. Take the same names, same dates, look at another Hebrew book, see if they appear. We said, great, which book? He said, do War and Peace. Get Tolstoy's War and Peace in Hebrew, make it the same size as Genesis, put it on a computer, look for the codes, see what happens. Control experiment. We come back to Jerusalem, take War and Peace, put it on the computer, get the Hebrew translation, run it through the computer, nothing shows up. It works beautifully in Torah, doesn't work at all in War and Peace. No codes of any significance. So we wrote a letter to him, we said, we tried it, it didn't work. He says, okay, try Moby Dick. Get Hebrew Moby Dick, put it on the computer, look for the codes there, nothing shows up. He says, okay, try another 5 Hebrew books. We take 5 Hebrew novels, put them on the computer, look for the codes, nothing shows up. We did 7 control experiments that failed.
Nothing at all, or some?
Nothing of any significance. Once or twice, something a little close by accident, but nothing of any statistical significance. We had done 7 control experiments that basically failed. It only works in Torah. We said, okay, let's get it published. He says, no, not yet. Try another bunch. He says, here's what you should do. Take the book of Torah, take the book of Breshit, and scramble up all the letters and see if the codes appear that way. You take Genesis, scramble letters, look for the codes that way, nothing appears. He says, okay, now scramble up all the sentences. Try that, look for the codes, nothing appears. We had done at this point, I think, 12 control experiments that all failed. This is still standing strong. He says, I'm still not satisfied. So we wrote him a letter and we said, listen, this can go on forever. Tell us now in advance, how many other books do we have to check before you're willing to sign on that this is legitimate? He writes back and he says, if you can rerun the experiment on 1 million other books and they all fail, I'll sign my name. That's called a good sample size. Try the same thing on 1 million other random Hebrew books and see what happens. We have computers running for 4.5 years, looking through 1 million random Hebrew books, looking for these kinds of codes. 4.5 years go by, results come out, nothing. No codes of any statistical significance anywhere in a million other random Hebrew books. We book a flight back to Stanford to meet Professor Diakonis. Okay? We spend time with him, we knock on the door. He looks at us and he says, "You guys, you did it? You actually did 1 million? Yeah, we did it. Here's the results. Look for yourself." Nothing. He had no choice. He signed his name onto it. We go back to the Journal of Statistics with the signature of the #1 statistician in the world. We showed it to them. They couldn't believe he signed it. He's the head of the Skeptics Association. He's signing a thing to get it published in a topic. This makes no sense. They had no choice. They decided to publish it. Here's what they said. What they said is, "We'll publish it. But there's one more thing we need you to do before we publish it. We're not done yet. One more thing. One last try to get out of this." They said, "We have to calculate what are the odds that this might have just happened by accident." Right? It could have. Anything could happen. So they said like this. They said, in a normal experiment, like in any psychology, chemistry, biology, in a normal experiment, what's considered the level of significance that you need to publish an experiment? What would you say is the p-value of a normal standard?
95, 97.
90, okay, good. So let's go with 95 for now. 95%, 5% margin, right, which is a 1 in 20. What this means is, when you do an experiment and it works, you have to be able to show there's a less than 1 in 20 chance that you just got lucky. That's basically what it means. That's considered the normal standard. If you're doing something very dangerous, something very controversial, they ask for a higher standard of 0.02. 2% margin, 1 in 50, right? A 1 in 50 chance, you have to show there's less than 1 in 50 chance that it happened by accident. In our experiment, with the rabbis, they said get to a result of 1 in 1,000. I have never in my life met a scientist in any field of science who needed to get results of 1 in 1,000 just to publish a paper. It is unheard of. Okay, but what are we trying to prove? That God wrote Torah. They want a very, very high standard. They take our results, they give it to a bunch of scientists, they make their calculations, they come back, they say, here's what we figured out. The odds of all the names and dates of all these rabbis coming together purely by accident is really a possibility of 1 in 62,500. There's a 1 in 62,500 chance that you just got lucky that all the names and dates, all the names and dates of all these rabbis all happened by accident. Okay, we're good. So at this point, they had no choice, and they decided to publish it. So the journal called Statistical Science publishes an article called Equidistant Letter Sequences in the Book of Genesis. Professor Ritz and a couple of people involved with it got published, made news around the world. Okay?
When was it published?
This is August 1994. It's going back a while now.
Oh.
Yeah. So it hit all the TV shows, it hit all the American press. We were contacted by the Mossad, the FBI, the CIA, the KGB, literally all over the world. Okay, where do you guys do this and how do you do it? You know, give us the gist, we want to try it ourselves. So it got out there, it became very controversial. And you can imagine, right? This is the top journal in the world publishing an article saying that there's hidden codes that no human being could have put there. So some very, very significant senior mathematicians came together and said, there's no way, there's got to be a mistake here somewhere. They got together, they went through everything that we did. How do you spell the names? How do you spell the dates? How do you know they died on those dates? What formulas? They went through everything we did with a fine-tooth comb. They took 3 years. They came back and they said, we found 5 mistakes in their paper. We found 5 places where they claimed actually that we cheated. They said, we found 5 places where they cheated. They didn't spell that name right. That rabbi didn't actually die on that date. We went to the cemetery, we checked it for ourselves. He died the next day. This one, you didn't use the formula properly, you didn't calculate it properly. They made all these accusations that we lied and cheated to get the results. So we said, listen, we didn't lie and cheat, but you think we made mistakes. Let's redo the experiment the way you think it should be done. We'll correct the data to the way you think it should be spelled. Let's see what happens. So we do, and it turns out that the results actually change. When it gets corrected by our critics, the results change from 1 in 62,500. The real result is 1 in 1,694 times. We said, thank you very much. We misspelled a couple of the names. We used one wrong formula. When you fix it, the results become much, much stronger. You go on the website.
What did they say?
So one of the critics on the spot joined our team. He's now a codes researcher. He said, like, forget it, this is obviously true. He's a professor of electrical engineering in Seattle, Professor Robert Herlick. He's now on the codes side. All the other critics are still looking for ways to disprove us. To this day, we're trying to find ways to disprove us. If you go on Google and you look for Bible codes or Torah codes, you'll find hundreds of websites attacking us. They didn't do this properly, they didn't do that properly, how do we really know? They cheated, they could have cheated. There's not one single scientist anywhere in the world who can actually find any flaw, any mistake in any of the work that we've done. Okay, I'm in touch with them, I'm in touch with the critics, I'm in touch with the researchers. This is solid science, it's never been refuted. This experiment was very controversial, how do you spell the names? They actually published their own study saying that we could have cheated on the names. So what we did like this, to end the science part, we've gone on to do dozens of other experiments to show the idea of codes using all kinds of different things. We look for the names of all the Masechtot of the Talmud are all encoded together. Bava Kama, Bava Matzia, Bava Batra, Shabbat, Brachot, Pesachim, all encoded together, odds of 1 in 4.5 million. The names of all the cities that Yoshua conquered of Eretz Yisrael when he came into the land, odds of 1 in 50 million. Harold Gans from the Pentagon, look for the names of the cities where the rabbis lived, all encoded together, odds of 1 in 1.4 million. The 70 nations of Parshas Noah that are all mentioned together, all encoded, odds of 1 in 250 million, 1 in a quarter billion. We had a couple of failures. We looked for certain kinds of sequences that didn't show up so much. We had one failure. This was also kind of a failure. Tons of Haman, not a big finding. But on the whole, time after time after time, we're finding experiments where the odds are 1 in a million, 1 in 10 million, 1 in 100 million. To this day, there's no scientist anywhere in the world who has any way of refuting all the experiments that we've done. There's a lot of talk on the web about how we could have cheated this and that on the names of the dates of the rabbis. These are standing results that are publicly available. Nobody has found any way to see it. Any questions so far? Okay, that sort of, for me, is sort of the science end. I believe we're right. I believe we've proven that we're right. I believe that we've proven it over and over. We did another conference in Hong Kong a few years ago. We published 7 more papers with all kinds of other contributors that also prove the idea of codes. It's a standing result. When you put together the odds of all the experiments that we've done, the odds of all of them being true together, some of the major ones, it's whatever. There's no name for that number. It's just a bunch of zeros, but it's 1 in a, whatever you want to call it, 100 billion, a quadrillion, something like that. Fine. That's the science. Now that we know that it's been proven, now that we know that science is behind it, let's just see what kind of codes. Let's just look for names and dates and places of stuff and see what we find. We're going to tell the computer to look for words related to the Holocaust. Names, dates, and places related to the Holocaust, what do we find? We find a code over here that says the word Hatzorer, Hebrew word for an enemy. In Tanakh, it's called a tzorer. Underneath the tzorer says the word Nazit. Hatzorer HaNazi. Nazi and enemy crossed right underneath each other, skipping the letters. Here it says Germania, right on top of the word Nazi. Here it says Berlin, every 4 letters backwards, right on top of the word Germany. Here it says Shever Yehudim, a Jewish catastrophe. All the words encoded in the same spot. We're going to take the same Berlin now. We're going to move over. I'll show you some more codes that are related. There's the word Berlin from before. Here's the word Nazi again, every 1 letter. Here's the code of the word Hitler. Hitler's name is every 31 letters going backwards. On top of the word Hitler it says Rasha, also every 31 letters. Sorry?
What about the concentration camps?
We'll get to that and I'll show you in a minute. Beside Hitler it says Iro, his city, right? It's almost reading like a story. Hitler, his city was Berlin, he was evil, he was a Nazi. All the words encoded together. We have, again, the word Berlin as we had before. We're just moving further over on the screen. Here's another code of the word Nazi. Here it says Amalek, right? We know Amalek was the nation always out to destroy us. Sorry. In times of Tanakh, Amalek, right? Amalek didn't want to capture us. Amalek wanted to destroy us. Crossing through the word Amalek is a code of the word swastika, Slavkeres. Swastika crossing right through.
Question right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so right now in yellow, Berlin is every 4 letters going backwards.
Right.
But it looks like Amalek, if that's all it is, and that 262 letter or whatever it is wide on the page,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be that close together on the line.
No, so that 262 was only because of the word Hanukkah. In other words, in all these examples, once the computer finds one main word, it sets up the screen length based on it. Here it was the word swastika. So in other words, these lines are actually 3,725 letters across.
Oh, okay.
Find one word, you set up the screen, and then you look for the other words.
Okay.
So Slav Keres is every line, and Amalek, which is double, is every other line. Make sense? Okay. Other words related here, we have other Holocaust words. Here we have the word Auschwitz. You were asking before about the names of the camps. The word Auschwitz, beside it, going through it, it says the word Eichmann. Eichmann was the one who came up with the idea of the final solution. So the name Eichmann crosses right through Auschwitz, which was the main camp. Here we have Nirtzichu. They were murdered in Auschwitz. Here it says Kilu, they were destroyed. Michaleh, Hebrew word for a destroyer. Here it says Biyad SS. Right, just like Auschwitz is every 300 letters, Biyad SS, the hands of the SS, was also every 300 letters, all on the same spot. Here's a code that says the word Eichmann again, every 2 letters like we had before. Here's the code of the word gas, right? The idea was to use the gas, kill the Jews in the camps. Between the word Eichmann and the word gas, here we go. Between the word Eichmann and the word Gaz is a code that says Zeldman B. Zeldman B was the name of the cyanide gas that Eichmann used to kill the Jews in the camps. So the word Zeldman B touches the word Eichmann, it was his idea. Touches the word Gaz, it was a kind of gas. Again, we're just taking names, dates, places, people, plugging them in, and seeing how close they end up landing. Twin Towers. Now again, now we're fast forwarding. We're talking about right 2000. So now we're not looking at Sefer Bereshit. Now we're looking at the entire Chumash altogether. The whole Chumash altogether is about 300,000 letters long. It's a pretty big sized book. You look through the entire Chumash. Where does it say the word twin towers? So you find the phrase Migdalot, every 1 letter backwards. Hateomim, every 1 letter backwards. Both words are underneath each other, every 1 letter backwards. What's the most obvious phrase you would think to look for next to the word Twin Towers? What's the event known as?
9/11.
9/11, right? September 11th. Let's look for the phrase September 11th. Now, in that year, September 11th was the 23rd of Elul. It was Chaf Gimel Elul. So the computer looked through the entire Chumash. Where do you find the phrase Chaf Gimel Elul? The phrase Chaf Gimel Elul goes right through the Twin Towers. Underneath it, you have the word Yishmael, obviously connected.
These are always the minimal.
The minimal skip of each word, yeah. And here it's easy because they're all 1 letter across. Tevach, murder, another obvious word. It was interesting. I was giving this class a few years ago, and somebody in the class asked me. They said, if these are all codes found actually in the text of the Torah, so what's the Torah? What's the story going on over here? Is there any connection between the codes and the actual storyline? So I said, I'm not sure. I started reading through, trying to figure it out. And I came across it and I said, oh my gosh, it's unbelievable. I never realized. What's the official estimate of how many people died at the Twin Towers?
3,000.
Right. They don't know the exact number. They say it was around 3,000. The pasuk over here is talking about Moshe coming down from Har Sinai. He sees that the Eruv Rav had built the Egel, and the Torah says that the people involved in doing the Avodah Zarah, the idol worship, had to get killed. The Torah says, this is the line of Torah, the Torah says, Vayipol min ha'am bayom ha'hu ki shloshet alfei ish. The Torah says around 3,000 people died on that day. We just talked about 3,000 people dying on that day of September 11th. It's the exact phrase out of any pasuk in Torah talking about what happened. 3,000 people dying in a day. It's exactly what happened. It's exactly in the same spot.
This is like 14,146.
Yeah, because the phrase Chaf Gimel Elul is a very unusual phrase. So that's the one time it appears. Okay, let's go on a little bit. So we find another Twin Towers. We found a code here that says Matos. Again, just the obvious words to look for. Matos, hipil, an airplane that knocked down. Migdalei Teomim. There it is again, right? Migdalei Teomim. Teomim, Migdalei is over here. Now, this was interesting. I was sitting with Professor Rips. We were looking for these codes. It was about a month after it happened. We were looking for these codes. Now, when I typed into the computer, I typed in the plural. I typed in matosim hipilu midilatomim. It didn't appear. The plural words for matosim and hipilu don't appear anywhere near it. It only appears in the singular. I said, it doesn't make sense. It happened twice. Like, it wasn't one thing. It wasn't just one tower. So Professor Rip says to me, of course it happened twice. Just look at the code. It says so. Right here it says, Pa'amayim. It happened twice. The code is saying an airplane fell and knocked into a building, and then the same thing happened again a second time. That's the way the code is reporting what the event was. And that's how we remember it. It happened, oh my gosh, it happened again. It was a double event. That's how we remember it. Over here says, Lamut Sham, the Jews were worried about dying in the desert, being captured, being stuck, not being able to escape. Also a related phrase.
It might be right, but as far as the skipping, it looks like the word Tebumim would be a shorter skip than Migdal, based on how I'm viewing where the letters are. And I don't know if it's reversed, perhaps.
1 second. Migdal, so Migdale over here. So
Right.
from the mem should
Right.
be.
So it's at least every 2 lines there.
You're right.
Whereas a Tebumim.
You're right. These should be reversed.
Oh,
90% right. I didn't notice that. Thank you. Yeah. There were one. This one is the 36. This one is the 71. Thank you for pointing that out. That's true. Okay. What else do we find? Let's try something more modern. Let's keep going.
Curiosity, do you also do matos with pentagon?
We found something about the Pentagon. It was a little more vague, so I didn't put that one up. But there was some sort of finding about the Pentagon also. Gilad Shalit, right? We all know Gilad Shalit, captured. The word Gilad appears as a code. The word Shalit appears as a code, just skipping equal letters. It says over here, Beshevi, he was kidnapped, captured. Right? Very close to his name. It says over here, Hamas. Hamas took responsibility for it. It says over here the word Shalit again for a second time. I'm not quite sure why. The Torah phrase over here is, it says that when Yosef was kidnapped when the brothers sold off Yosef, he was sold to the Ishmaelim. The Ishmaelim sold him to the Madanim. The Madanim sold him to the Mitzri. Mitzri sold him to the Midianim. He got passed around many, many different Arab hands. Right? Reuven comes back and it says, Vayomer hayeled einenu va'ana aniyana ba. Reuven comes back and says, I came back to find our brother Yosef and he's gone. When the camp got ambushed and the soldiers all left, they thought Gilad Shalit left with him. They realized, oh my gosh, he's still on thing. They came back to get him. He had been kidnapped in the meantime. They came back to get their brother, and the brother was gone. He was taken by the Arabs. He was passed on from one Arab to the next. Many different groups exchanged him over many, many years. Originally Hamas, but many other. Like the stories parallel each other in a lot of ways. The tsunami. This is going back to the main tsunami from a few years ago. The one that hit Southeast Asia. The date was Yudel Tevet. It says over here, in Asia, in Asia, that's where it happened. It says Rivavot Nisfu. Tens of thousands were drowned. And you have the phrase over here, Be tsunami. Tens of thousands drowned in a tsunami in Asia on the December 26th of December. Again, just literally taking stories out of the paper, plugging them in, all the codes appear together. I think I have one more example to show you.
What's the text?
This is talking about, what event would you think would be related to?
Bubble.
No? Even better.
Spreading the Red Sea.
Yes, exactly. Right, though it says over here, I don't have it outlined, the wall was surrounding them from the left and from the right, right? They all drowned together in the sea.
What was the Shoah, sorry?
Huh?
What was the Shoah? Background.
The Shoah, the ones there were the Jews going into Egypt, on their way down to Egypt, going in wagons, just like almost like trains, in wagons going down to Egypt and spending time in exile in Egypt. That's where it talks about the Holocaust. Hurricane Katrina. It's already going back to a couple years ago, but Hurricane Katrina, we have the word New Orleans. We have the phrase over here, Chaf Bet Av, that was the date that the hurricane hit. Chemat Af, right, talking about a divine act of destruction, an act of God called Chemat Af, God's wrath of anger. And it says over here, where is it over here? Katrina, the phrase Katrina. to this, I haven't had time to put the newer ones on, but there are codes about Trump, and there's codes about Obama, and there's codes about the latest hurricanes from the ones from the last few months. It's literally on a day-to-day basis. Things happen in the world, we look for codes, we find all the codes and code together. We check millions of other random Hebrew books. They don't appear in any of those books. So scientifically, we know it's real. We've got the evidence to say that, we say everything in the world is literally the blueprint of Torah. You see, Torah has the stories of everything that's ever going to happen in life. Yeah?
Regarding specifically Katrina, have you checked out Hitnut Kut?
Hitnut Kut, yes, there's a whole bunch of codes about the Hitnut Kut.
Because I actually did the math on that one, and the percentage of the population that was displaced from the Hitnut Kut and the percentage of the population of the U.S. that was displaced from Katrina.
I heard that. Nice.
Very close.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. I try and avoid the more political ones. But you're 100%. I saw exactly the same thing.
What about Iran?
Lots of codes about Iran. It raises an interesting question. There are many codes about Ahmadinejad, Iran, the Revolutionary Guards, nuclear missiles, war, Jerusalem, the UN, like all those words are there. What it doesn't tell us is if it's actually going to happen. Because all the code might be telling us is it could happen, there's a threat of it happening, Ahmadinejad's planning on it happening, but there's no code that can ever actually tell you what's going to happen. For all the codes we found, I'll say this, there's many, many people that try and use the codes to figure out things in the future. Right? Because you just look for names and dates and places, but there's no, you have to realize, like, until an event happens, you don't really know what to look for. So if I find a code that says nuclear war, Jerusalem, Iran, maybe it means it's going to happen, maybe it means it was avoided, maybe it means it was a threat, maybe it means it was a plan. The code can't ever tell you actually what's really going to happen in history. So once an event happens, we look back, we find everything encoded, now we know. But nobody's ever used codes to figure out future events successfully until. Yeah.
Why don't we use it in our school systems? Why don't we teach it in school? That's number one. And number two, just out of curiosity, with Eliyahu Rips, it looks like he was not an observant Jew initially, what the video that you showed, and certainly looks like some of the pictures you showed later. I want to know, did he become an observant Jew as a result of the work that he was doing?
He didn't actually. He became observant and then came across the codes. In the movie, I think BBC tried to make it look like the codes, but he was observant before that. I'll tell you what's interesting. I had this thought a while ago. There's still a whole debate with the critics who think that we cheated and whatever else. There's nobody on the codes team that needs codes to be true to validate what we believe. I didn't become religious because I saw codes. It definitely influenced me, but there's many, many other wonderful things about Judaism that got me convinced more than codes. I don't need codes to be true to validate what I believe in. The skeptics definitely need codes not to be true to validate what they don't believe in. So there's much more of a desperation on their end to prove that it's not true than there is any need on mine to prove that it is true. It happens to be all the critics of code. There's about 8 or 9 major critics. They're all secular. Some of them are very openly anti-religious. One guy is actually religious. There's an Orthodox Jew who's anti-codes. He's got this thing about there's no way God would want to prove himself, and you're supposed to take a leap of faith, and you're not supposed to know if this stuff is true. You're just supposed to believe, take that blind leap. And so for him, also codes is sort of a problem because it's a little too in his face evidence that he just doesn't like to have. But otherwise, the religious people believe in it, and the non-religious
don't. The simplest refutation of that critique is that God proved himself with the pillar of smoke. When we left Egypt and everything.
Yeah, exactly.
They proved himself then.
Plenty of proofs. Exactly. Through the entire Torah talks about proofs. 100%. To answer your other question about the education system, so I'll tell you this, I've given a class like this to 16, 17-year-olds, it gets very mixed reactions. I'm honestly not sure why. I don't know if it's too in your face, or it's maybe a little over their heads, because it gets a little too scientific maybe. I find that 18 plus is definitely a more ready and willing. I have no problem getting to a completely secular, hostile audience. I can handle it and deal with critique and the questions, but younger than 18, I find people are not, for some reason, not able to handle the information so well. So it works great with college groups. They do it all the time. classes in here, I go to the States, I travel, I give classes there. Any other questions?
So what do you guys do all day? You can't look for things to happen, you can't,
I have a day job, I teach in yeshiva. I teach in yeshiva in the old city. This for me is like a side thing. I do presentations, I do a little research still. The main thing going on now, honestly, with the research, Elio Rips is always like every day in the papers, he's reading the papers, whatever the latest thing is, looking for codes about it, trying to figure out who's going to win the election, and what's going to happen with Bibi now, and the submarine scandal, and he's always trying to find codes about what's going on right now. All the other researchers are spending their time trying to figure out deeper layers of codes. Because you have to realize, like, everything we found here is a very simple kind of code. It's two-dimensional, skipping equal letters. Once you go with skipping unequal letters, or you go into three-dimensional codes or four-dimensional codes, there's so much more theoretically that could be found. So they're testing new ways of finding deeper layers of code.
And like you said, one of the things at the beginning, I think, is the shapes of the letters.
Right.
Shapes, so is that something that they're also looking at?
So that's been a little harder to quantify mathematically. So that one they haven't done anything. There's all kinds of midrashim that talk about the shapes of the letters and what they mean, but it's hard to put it into a scientific realm that you can really quantify it. So we're dealing more with skipping letters. We're doing like exponential sequences, logarithmic sequences, and all kinds of different patterns, and two-dimensional, three-dimensional. So they're starting to find all kinds of cool things. One of my friends is doing research into what the number means, and like what's the relationship between the word Katrina and 2509? Is that how many people were displaced? Is that how many federal agents were on the case? Like, he's trying to figure out the connection between the numbers of the codes and the actual words. I haven't seen any results yet, but it's an interesting thing to look into. Like, obviously nothing is coincidental. There's a reason why things came up the way they did. Yeah?
Continuing on that line, with the three-dimensional aspect of it, have you done anything with the visualization of, say, taking the regular layout of a Sefer Torah, making it into a big circle, and saying where some of these codes, if you make point-to-point lines, what kind of designs that shows?
There's somebody also in that area specifically looking for visual patterns. I haven't seen it. He's been working on it for about 2 years. I haven't seen anything so compelling yet. I look at it, with everything we found, I think it's the tip of the iceberg. I think there's so much more depth that we haven't even gone to yet. We've done enough to say we know it's true, and it's not a coincidence, and it's real. How deep it goes, and how many more layers, and what other kinds of information, who knows? It can go on and on and on. We'll see what the coming years bring. Yeah.
I'm not sure, we had Berger and Milstein and somebody else speaking on these seminars. What we like to say at the end, I guess sort of take the edge a little bit off the audience, and say, look, we have not proven God wills it, because we don't know what God wills. So we have proven is that whatever wrote the Torah is beyond time and space.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's a good way to say it. I usually frame it as, when you want to talk about proving anything, really. So, in a court of law, we say we're willing to give somebody capital punishment, even if there's evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Right? So this isn't, nothing in the world of science is an absolute proof. Right? There's always the possibility of a crazy coincidence. To me, it's evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, like you said, that something beyond time and space, who knows the future, knows the past, in precise detail, is the one who gave us this book. That much we know. Call it God, call it whatever name you want, that's clearly the case. Thank you very much for your time.